Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of the second book of Kings, that is Malachim Bet. We are in the middle of chapter 21. We have just read of the tragic and terrible leadership of Menashe, the king who was the son of Yoshiyahu, and we are about to read of Menashe's son Amon, who unfortunately continued to lead the people in this direction. I want to point out a few things, and that is that we have found in the northern kingdom, which is now long gone at this point in history, when they were corrupt, when they worshipped idols, when the kings led through oppression, through corruption, through evil, that it was very common for the kings to meet their end by being assassinated, and then someone else would take over the kingdom. And we have found several times as well kings being assassinated in with the southern kingdom as well. The main primary difference is that when kings were assassinated in the southern kingdom, it was usually because they had gone too far down an evil path, and then they ended up getting assassinated. And then the people who committed the assassination then reinstated the Davidic monarchy, as opposed to newly establishing a new monarchy. We're going to see a similar pattern here with Amon, which just demonstrates that despite the fact that Judah had clearly not lived a perfect history, Judah had many times when it descended into corruption and sin, just as we saw, of course, and it's probably at its worst level under the leadership of Menashe. There was always a thread of hope in Judah. There was always some kind of redeeming factor, as opposed to within Israel, within the northern kingdom, we never ever saw a redeeming factor. There never rose a leadership that actually tried in any real way to bring the people back to God. Judah had a back and forth, whereas Israel did not. Israel was just all down, which ultimately is the theme that we're going to gather from that is that Israel was wiped off the face of history, never to return, other than, as we've seen before, many refugees joined the people of Judah, but Israel as a nation is gone. Judah as a nation was destined to eventually come back, despite its destruction and exile, as the prophets stated. So, but let's read now the story of Amon. It's a little bit short today, but this is the story of Amon. Ben 22 shana Amon b'malcho. Amon became king when he was 22 years old. Ushtayim shanim malach b'Yerushalayim, and he ruled for 2 years. V'shem imo, his mother's name was Mishulemet bat Charutz min Yatva. That was his mother's name. The position of the queen mother was obviously a powerful an important position, which is why it's always mentioned along with the king. We've seen that the last several kings. If he did evil, he did bad in the eyes of God, just as his father Menashe did. And he went b'chol haderech asher halach aviv, in the way that his father went. In other words, not only did he worship, but he also acted in the way that his father acted. He worshipped the fetishes. I like that translation. These are the small idols that people would worship, that his father did. And he bowed to these idols. And he abandoned God, the Lord of his forefathers. And he did not go in the way of God. So again, the emphasis, not only did he worship these idols, but he also went in an evil path. Listen to the last podcast where I emphasized the difference between the two, that it's bad enough that one has the theological error of idol worship, but what really drives the nail in the coffin, so to speak, is when one actually lives a life that abandons the ways that God was trying to teach people what to go upon. Vayikshru avdei Amon alav, and the servants of Amon conspired against him. Vayamisu es hamelech beveso, and they assassinated the king in the king's palace. But then, after the king was assassinated, Vayach Ha'aretz, the people of the land. Now, Ha'aretz often means the leadership of the land. They were, there's not a lot of detail here, so some of this is speculation, but what it seems like is that the people that conspired to kill the king wanted to take over power themselves, just as had happened with their cousin's kingdom to the north in the past. So they wanted to kill the king. However, the leaders of the land did not want that to happen. They may not have been great fans of Amon, but they did want the Davidic monarchy to continue. So therefore, they went ahead and killed et kol hakoshrim ala melech Amon. They went ahead and took over and put to death the conspirators who had assassinated Amon. Vayamlichu am haaretz, and the people of the land went and they brought. Now, am haaretz is often understood also to mean the people of the land. So this just shows that the people of the land then, represented by their leadership, but this was the desire of the people that made the king king. This is a very different concept. This is a much more modern concept of a king becoming king because it's the desire of the people. At Yoshiyahu v'no tachtav, Yoshiyahu, Josiah, the king, who was Amon's son, and made him king in his stead. So they restored, the Davidic monarchy was at risk of being lost. Yoshiyahu was then made king by the people of the land. And as we'll see soon, we'll read in a minute about Yoshiyahu, but V'yeser divrei Amon asher and all of the other things that Amon did as king. If you want to read the history of his brief kingdom of 2 years, you can go, feel free to read them in the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah. They buried him in Gan Uzzah, which is the same place where Manasseh was buried. And Yoshiyahu, his son, became king in his stead. Now I'm going to just read the first 2 verses of chapter 22. Ben Shmona Shana Yoshiyahu b'malcho. Yoshiyahu was only 8 years old when he became king, which helps us understand how these conspirators figured the heir to the throne of Amon is a young boy, so he won't have power and supporters. They'll be able to take over, but the people nonetheless put him in charge. And he ruled for 31 years. V'shem imo, and his mother's name was Yedida bat Adaya Mibotzkat, from the place called Botzkat. And he did what was good in the eyes of God. One gets the sense that the people were sick and tired of this evil. The people wanted to go back to God. Similarly to Yoshiyahu's ancestor, his ancestor Yehoash, who was a child when the people overthrew Queen Atalia and put Yehoash back onto the throne, thus restoring the kingdom of Judah. And Yehoash, at least in the beginning of his career, for most of his career, was faithful to God and restored the worship of God and restored a just kingdom. The similar thing we find here, where the people restored Yoshiyahu, also a child, and restored him and influenced him to be faithful to God. He did what was good in the eyes of God. And he went in the paths of his ancestor David. He did not turn to the right or the left. So once again, we find something hopeful. Unfortunately, we're going to find that it's too little too late, but at least Yoshiyahu brought some hope back. Brought the people back to God. And we're going to read about the career of Yoshiyahu in the next podcast when we continue chapter 22. Thank you so much for studying this together with me. Looking forward to completing chapter 22, the story of Yoshiyahu, and then unfortunately the tragic story of the descendants of Yoshiyahu as the Babylonians eventually subjugated the kingdom of Judah and ultimately destroyed it. But we have a little brief period of good, which we're about to read together, so hang on. It's not all bad. Have a wonderful day.